Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah Show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode. The Ask Noah Show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening.
It is a good evening. How was your week?
You know what? Par for the course. Just we had a wicked windstorm just after Thursday night. 100-mile-an-hour winds, tearing up trees all over the place and that sort of stuff. So still digging out from all of that kind of storm, at least on my property. Lots of people have recovered, but there's still lots of trees downed all over the place. So it's just been, it's been normal. Get up, go to work, then come home, do more work, go to bed.
So I have to ask, when a storm rips through Steve's neighborhood and you go outside, it's okay, there's trees all over the place or down trees all over the place and bushes and things I got to clean up. Do you go out there and is it fun to get outdoors and do things, or are you one of the people that's like, I'm a nerd, this is outside and it's scary and I want to go back inside and work on computers and automation and things?
I grew up in the county. This stuff is old hat for me. There's no issues.
Okay, so this is just back to the grind, as it were.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's jump into feedback. Before we do, I want to make a plea, as it were. The show is driven by feedback. So there's a couple of ways that you can participate. The best way to participate is join us live by going to asknoahshow.com, 6 p.m. Central on Tuesday nights. So you can join us in our interactive Mumble room, or you can join us inside of our chat room at geeklab.ninja. You can participate there. You can type your question out. You can join a voice chat. However it is you want to participate, the voice chat or the phone calls are honestly the best. If you call us at 866-280-1433, that will help. I'm sorry, 855-450-6624. Gave out Altispeed's number. That is the best way to participate because it allows us to have an interactive conversations. Can't count the number of times that Steve and I have been going through email or feedback and going, well, if we knew what he was saying, if we knew what she was asking, we would say X, Y, or Z. So giving us a call at 855-450-6624 allows us to have that conversation real time and get you the answer that you need. If that doesn't work, or if you prefer to do it over the computer, then you can jump in Mumble or you can jump in our Jitsi room. But as a last measure, you can always send in emails, and you can do that by sending an email to live@asknoahshow.com. You can do that anytime throughout the week, and then what we do is we categorize all of those emails, and the ones that are one-off answers, we read them on the air. But what we're working towards is trying to categorize when a bunch of people write in and say, hey, I'm looking for the best way to, set up a backup server. Or the jellyfin on a pie. Didn't think we were going to get as much traction out of that. But it turns out there's a large interest in the community. Steve and I didn't know that. So when you write in and tell us, hey, I'm looking to run Jellyfin on a Pi 4, or what's the best way to run something Jellyfin on a Pi, or how do I get Jellyfin running on my TV, we can take all of those emails together, go through, either do some research, do some testing, poke people into the community, bring somebody on if necessary, and then come back and present that as an answer. But for that process to work, we have to have your participation. So please run, not walk, to your nearest computer and safely write an email to live@asknoahshow.com. Let us know how we can help or how we can serve you. Let's get into
if you're going to write a dissertation, that's fine. I read every email that comes into the inbox. However, we might not put the giant email on the air if we can't summarize it. So if you want your question read on the air and kind of answered by us, try to be concise. If you want to get it included in a larger topic discussion, feel free. Then I'll cherry pick bits and pieces to kind of summarize what it is that you're trying to express to the community. So just think about, do I want this answered immediately or with some speed, or is it part of a larger discussion? And that should guide the length of your email.
Absolutely. I see people doing this in geeklab.ninja, so I'll make a plug for this as well. We have our questions bot, questions@linuxdelta.com. His nickname is Marlon. He keeps track of everything for us. And one of the things that Marlon has been doing is begging people in the chat room for learning topic suggestions. So kind of as an aside to what we were just talking about, obviously that's how we structure the feedback. Would like to address your feedback. But in addition to that, we're looking for some very specific curated topics, large topics that we can really dig in, prepare in advance, and then come and give you a solid presentation. And right now we're collecting topics to do that. So if you'd like to suggest those, you can send them into live@asknoahshow.com. You can give us a call at 855-450-NOAH, or you can ping Marlon in the Geek Lab and just tell Marlon, hey, this is a good topic for learning. I would like to do that. All of those remain available to you. Well, without further ado, let's dig into some feedback. Our first email comes in from Simon. Simon writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. First off, thanks for asking my question last week. It was definitely informative and exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to dive a little bit more into the ZFS and ButterFS issue. Steve mentioned that the advantage of ZFS compression, and I'm impressed. Are there advantages to using either file system, ZFS or Btrfs, over another on a home server? And what do you think about Canonical's push in recent years to concisely support root on ZFS? Also, have you had any Red Hat certifications changed in light of COVID? I remember seeing that you could take exams virtually, which defeated one of the big selling points of the exams. Have either of you taken a Red Hat certification in recent years, and is it still worth now that the business justification and social cred it was in previous years? Thanks for the show, Simon." So, I guess let's answer in order here. Thoughts on advantages to file systems, ZFS or Btrfs over another for a home server system?
Well, I mean, you get snapshots. My biggest one was compression, to be honest with you. I started doing it to compress my Steam library, which actually works fairly well, as well as some other types of things like virtual machine images because of the kind of speed advantages we talked about last time. In terms of Btrfs or ZFS, your advantage is one versus the other. It really breaks down to, do you want one that's built into the kernel? Are you trying to do like a RAID 5 style implementation, or a RAID Z implementation would be the equivalent, or not? If you are, then, take a good look into Btrfs and where it stands with the data corruption and some of the problems it's had. I would say that between the two, I like ZFS because it still works with the standard Unix tooling, where Btrfs sometimes will misreport its size because it uses some different facilities. I know that those tools are starting to catch up, but depending on your distro and how far behind they are, or how up to date various packages are, some of the standard toolings like DF and DU and things like that may have a little bit harder time figuring out Btrfs. In terms of like a standard ext4 or XFS, to me, I don't really know why you would use those anymore, except for file systems you're not managing for the data. So for a root file system, I don't really care, pardon me, as long as it's a journaling file system. So I don't really think that makes that big of a difference. In terms of Canonical's push to support root on ZFS, that has a lot to do with being able to roll back and do, I'm going to say, quasi-transactional updates. So Red Hat's side of the camp has gone down the idea of like CoreOS or transactional updates, where essentially you're using RPM OS tree and it essentially ships down, I'm going to say, a firmware image. It's not. So all of the hyper technical people, I know it's not a firmware image, but it's a good way to think about it. It pushes down an image and it comes all as a package, and it's meant as kind of read only. And if there's a problem, it manages one or more root partitions at the same time, so that you can just roll, like you can switch between the various images that you have in case of trouble. So, I mean, there is some advantage to that. If you're using those style file system, it doesn't matter whether you're ZFS or Btrfs. What do you think, Noah?
This isn't, I recognize that this is somewhat of an esoteric a use case, but a large thing that drives my decision on what I'm going to do at home is what I'm doing at work. And that isn't, I get that doesn't apply to everyone, but I think you actually made a somewhat of an offhanded comment about this at one time too, saying if I can't multi-utilize a skill, then it becomes less appealing for me to acquire a new skill or technology, right? And so when I think about where I want to store my data or what I want to do with it, well, if I'm with ZFS, I can do everything from order a used Dell Optiplex and just set up ZFS on Linux, because with OpenZFS, the code base is primarily in Linux anyway. I can scale that then to TrueNAS, or I can go buy a $60,000 server from 45 drives and send ZFS there with ZFS replication. When I go to sit down in front of a client and they say, well, now I want to store this data set, or I want to sync this data set, that same tooling, that same technology, that same skill set, that same comfortability and command line interface is all going to translate one for one. So to me, if I got to the point where every time I was turning around, I ran into BTreeFS, I think that's probably a fine way to go. Right now, as it stands, it seems like every time I turn around, I'm bumping into ZFS. And so I have so much comfortability with it, and I trust it so much because I've not ever been bit by it. It's like I'm in a really happy home camp, and I have it's hard for me to it'd be hard for somebody to convince me to leave my happy home camp.
So I guess I like to put my toe in different technologies. So a user last week was talking about how they were using BTreeFS, and I think Linux Ninja also. I have two machines here at home, the comm center that you got for us, and my laptop that I reinstalled recently are both running BTreeFS for the compression en route. But in both cases, I'm not actually trying to preserve that data. Like my laptop, I treat as ephemeral. Like anything that's important gets synced via SpiderOak and Nextcloud. So if I lose the laptop or if the hard drive blows up, like it's really not that big of a deal. It's a little of an inconvenience to reinstall it. And for the comm center, it's like essentially a touchscreen that is meant to get on the internet, and that's its sole purpose in life. So I do kind of dabble with BTreeFS, and I think there's some interesting things that it brings. But going back to what you said, Noah, it's just not. I run into clients that run ZFS. I have not run into anybody running BTreeFS. Yeah.
Yet, I mean, with Facebook and it becoming a default in the Red Hat circle, I'm sure that's probably coming, right?
It's actually not default in Red Hat. So it's in Fedora, but you can't do it on RHEL.
You can't do it on RHEL?
You cannot do it on RHEL. The really? BTreeFS is not, the ButterFS tools or BTreeFS tools are not available yet. That may be coming, but they're definitely not there right now.
So there you have it. Advantages, disadvantages of it. I would tell you. So it's interesting. As in the past, I would say, I don't know, maybe 6 months, I've been really digging into Ansible and automation. And one of my favorite phrases that I've come across is treat your servers like cattle, not pets. And that is a modern way of what I used to say. I hate magic scripts. It used to drive me nuts. I worked for a company, and you'd walk in and there would be this server and everybody was like practically afraid to touch it or do anything. Oh, we don't know how it's set up. So-and-so set that up before we left, and we got to do this. We do this magical incantation, then that stays up. And so we wouldn't want to mess with it because it could go down. Like that is not a way to run a production environment at all. It drives me nuts. And so one of the things that's nice about Ansible is it is not just accepted, it's best practice to consistently blow away whatever you're working on, set it up from scratch, because if you're running the playbook against it, it's going to check to see what's done, what isn't done, and then go back and do it. When you take that same methodology and apply it across the board to technology, I no longer care about my laptop. It's nothing special. It's just a thing, a conduit to access data. And if I can trust the data pool on the back end, and I trust that that's backed up, and I trust that it's somewhere secure, and I trust that it's accessible to me, then I no longer really care about the conduit in which I use to get there. And so for me, if I'm building those things, the things that I'm going to rely on, the things that I'm going to be able to count on, that no matter what I do with the conduit, that this back-end thing is going to be a static, it's going to be consistent, it's going to be there, that's 100% of the time for me, ZFS. So, on to his second question, the reality of Red Hat certification. So, Steve, I have said in the past, basically since day one of this program, that I have the utmost respect for Red Hat exams for a couple of reasons. One, they are some of the most realistic exams that I've ever taken. I remember doing my Cisco certification and my RHCSA side by side. And I remember sitting in my Cisco exam class with a piece of transparency, an Expo marker, and a Kleenex, and like writing out subnets, because like 60 of the 90 questions are subnetting questions, writing out a subnet and trying to calculate it out, and then frantically trying to erase it with my little Kleenex. And of course, there's no liquid, so you're using, your spit, and then eventually the Kleenex becomes soaked, and then that's not helpful. So then you're using the palm of your hand, and it was a test in something, but I don't know how much technical things I really got or proved from taking that test. Fast forward a few months later, I'm taking my RHCSA, and I'm sitting inside of a lab with an actual Red Hat box, and they give me a list of 20-some whatever tasks, do these things, make the machine reboot. An instructor comes and runs a check against all of those things. Did you do it? Yes or no? And you either pass or you don't pass. I remember the clear light bulb that went off in my head. Should I ever have somebody sitting in my office that presents me with Cisco certifications understand that, and it obviously gets more difficult as you go up the ladder, but entry-level Cisco certifications understand that they probably understand subnetting fairly well and are excellent with the dry erase marker and a Kleenex. If somebody comes in and says, I have the entry-level Red Hat certification, they're probably pretty well suited to administrate a Red Hat box, at least in a fairly basic way. They understand the lay of the land when it comes to server administration. So I suspect that is what Simon is referencing here when he said one of the big points of the exam being defeated is if the exam is being conducted virtually, because obviously the presumption here is that it's being done not sitting in front of an actual Red Hat box, but over the internet. I somewhat suspect that even though the exam is being conducted virtually, it's still being done on a Red Hat box. That Red Hat box may not just be in front of the student. But do you have any recent experience with Red Hat certifications or exams, and what are your thoughts on them?
I absolutely do. And I can even tell you how the process works, because that's not NDA. That's just stuff you need to know if you're going to do it. So first of all, you have to run the operating system that is on the training website, full stop. So there is no worry about, they do a lot to make sure that there's no cheating. You have to have, in my case, I had to have 3 webcams pointing at me from different angles. You have to show that you don't have any other computers plugged in, at all. You're only allowed to use one external monitor, and periodically they stop the exam and ask you to show the entire room. So you walk around the room with the webcam, you show onto your desk, you show that the door is closed. They watch to make sure that you're not reading aloud. They make sure that you're not you can't use wireless keyboard and mouse, because that's part of that is, well, how do I know that you're typing in the machine itself?
Oh.
So there's like a whole list of rules that they've really thought out. It is annoying. It is not ideal, but the point is that it feels exactly like a Red Hat kiosk. You get the same feeling because they give you basically I'm going to call it the kiosk OS. I don't know what exactly it is. It's based on Fedora as far as I understand it. You stick it in your machine, and away you go, essentially. And I can't remember whether you actually have to carve off a partition, whether it runs on a USB drive. I don't remember, because I did it probably about 5 months ago now. But it's there. I don't think that one of the biggest selling points is defeated. It's the same thing as if you were going to a testing center. So in Toronto, the testing center was a box in a room, but you still had a bunch of virtual machines. And so as far as I knew, I might as well been shelled into somewhere else, because I have no idea what the kiosk machine does. Are the VMs running locally? Are they running somewhere else? I have no idea how that works. So as far as that's concerned, it's still the same kind of interface that you had before. They also offer a subsection of the exams as opposed to all of them. So you can't do all of them online for various reasons. So they're already hamstrung by what kind of things they can offer based on the equipment that's available and the proctors and all of the rest of that.
Are you able and willing to share what your most recent exam was? And
I did an OpenShift exam. I don't remember which one it was called, to be honest with you. It doesn't really matter. I do them just kind of out of, hey, this one's available and I need to keep my certs up somewhat for my own self professionally. And I didn't find it that hard, but the issue is you have to know how to take Red Hat exams. And I don't just mean Red Hat exams. It's crucial that you do time management. That's what the issue is. So I was chatting with someone today who did not pass their exam because they ran out of time. And that's just the reality of it. They're not difficult if you prioritize properly. If you let yourself get stuck on something, you'll fail because all of the questions you could have answered, you don't get around to. So the very first thing that I do is I tackle all of the ones that I consider easy and I go for it. And I literally will skip all, like sometimes there are 6 or 8 questions that I skip in a row and then I go back to them and I just keep cycling through based on how easy I think it is to approach those questions for me. And that's the way that you have to approach it, or else you'll get stuck on, like, so in one of the Ansible exams, one of the objectives, depending on your exam, is to create a dynamic inventory. And if you let yourself get stuck on, oh man, I can't remember how to do the dynamic inventory, and you beat yourself against the wall against that, you're not going to get anywhere else for any of the other stuff because, that's just the way it works.
Test-taking strategy. But here's the thing. Even with that strategy applied, what I'm hearing, Steve, is that you walk out of that exam proving the things that you can do to the machine or the tasks that you can accomplish. So as an employer, I literally had this conversation earlier this morning with a new teammate of ours. And he was asking, we have a meeting scheduled, and he's on a track to become a full-time employee. And so, we're guiding him through that process. And we have basically a little template that says you should have about 20 hours of this and about 20 hours of that and this, that, and the other. And he is judiciously going through and saying, okay, system administration. I need 20 hours of system administration. He's marking off what tickets he's working on and how many hours he's getting and stuff like that. And I told him today, at the end of the day, I don't really care how many hours you can put a little check mark next. That's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to get hands-on experience so that you can do the thing. To me, where the real value of Red Hat certifications come in is when you walk in the door and sit down in my office and say, I'm an RHCSA or I'm an RHCE. I know without any other discussion with you that you have a basic understanding of how a Red Hat Enterprise Linux box works and how to make some basic changes on it to administrate that system. So when I send you out to work at a client environment and you sit down in a production environment, you're going to know what the heck you're doing, at least to some degree. And of course, there's going to be newer versions of stuff and there's going to be custom configuration and custom deployments and stuff like that. But the basic tools are there and the basic understanding is there. To me, that is where the real value of Red Hat exams are. And if I'm, again, comparing that to the Cisco one, they do a lot of emulated technology. And so some of the commands aren't available in the emulated Cisco router. That isn't realistic. And there's oftentimes more than one way to skin a cat. And Red Hat, I would go so far as to say, encourages you to achieve the end result essentially however you want to achieve the end result, as long as you meet their checklist and they can mark those things off. So no, I don't think I would agree with Steve. I don't think there's any diminished return on investment for the way that Red Hat is doing it. And I'm glad to see that there's still a push to have you do it on an actual Linux box. They're just turning your own computer into a Linux box, it sounds like.
Yep. Like I said, you have to download the Kiosk OS or whatever, and away you go. It has Virt Manager on it, or at least it did when I was there. So it had Virt Manager on it, and it fired up VMs. But like I said, I don't know where those VMs lived necessarily. It didn't really matter.
Sure. Our second email comes in from Kevin. Kevin writes in and says, Noah and team, thanks for the great show. I listen to you guys every week. I have 2 questions. First, I was unable to attend your Matrix community event night due to a prior engagement. Would it be possible for you to post any links or resources to that event in the next episode? Secondly, I've been contemplating my Road Warrior setup for a lot of upcoming international travel. I currently use a YubiKey and Tails OS on a USB flash drive. However, after playing a bit with the RPi Zero, it occurred to me that I could set up a relatively secure mobile hotspot with all of the credentials, WireGuard, and security that I need to quote-unquote phone home or serve securely at various Wi-Fi hotspots or hotels. This way, I would only need to set up one device and not all of my other devices along with my family would remain untouched and relatively secure. I did some experimentation and hosted a local NFS Samba share on the device that I can watch media during flights and share media with all of my various devices at once. It works flawlessly. My idea would be to entail creating a known image file that I can write to the micro SD card, and if I believe something was compromised or altered in any way whatsoever, I need to make updates along the way. Looking for feedback on what you think of this sort of setup. I know that you'll have improvements that I didn't think of. Thank you in advance, Kevin. So, in order, so to kind of briefly recap, the community night was kind of born out of the concept that we can only answer so many questions on the air, and there are oftentimes that problems that they're not fun to solve on the air. It would be boring to listen to in a lot of ways, but people still have realistic problems, and so digging through those individual environment setups and individual variables, and then stepping through with a solution. Also, oh, by the way, having a bunch of people around that have a variety of expertise is a super helpful thing. And so essentially what we've been doing is one Thursday of a month, we all hang out and mumble and do stuff. And so the last community night, what we did was walked through running an Ansible playbook against a server, and the Ansible playbook was about setting up a Matrix infrastructure. So if you wanted to get started with Matrix and wanted to host your own server and said, I don't know how to do that, I don't know how to do these 9 or 10 or 12 things that you'd have to have a server running to run Matrix, well, no problem. Do you know your email address? Do you know what domain you want to use, and can you generate random passwords? And if the answer to those 3 questions are yes, then you fill out a file with about 10, you answer these 10 questions, and you run the playbook against whatever server you want, and out will come a Matrix system. And so we did that. A lot of people got Matrix set up. I did record it, but it wasn't made to be, published. It wasn't meant to, didn't have, my presentation cap on. I was just a geek hanging out with other geeks. So I can send you a copy of it, and you'd be welcome to watch through it. Really, what it comes down to is clone the Matrix Ansible deploy and run it, fill out the variables file and run it against a server. And then there's just a lot of geeking and nerding out in between there. But to the extent that helps you, absolutely. As far as your travel idea, so I have something similar in that I have a small little travel router. So wherever the internet source is, internet source comes in, all devices connect to the internet source. So that part I think I can get behind 100%. Where I kind of went like, wow, is you're looking at streaming content, NFS or Samba shares, like in travel, like in route. Potentially, that seems like that could be extremely cool, or an entire train wreck. I've never considered doing that during a flight. Not that it wouldn't necessarily be possible, but that's a lot of infrastructure to try to spin up in an airplane. Steve, thoughts?
No.
Okay.
That's my thoughts.
It could be cool though, right?
It would definitely be a neat geek project, but that would be one of those things where there's too many points of failure that are possible. And when you're talking about entertaining yourself on a plane, maybe part of the entertainment is troubleshooting with limited access to internet or installation processes. That's not my idea of a good time. So I'm more likely to be like, oh, it broke. Well, I have a book.
Yeah, I'm more of a laptop guy than a book guy, but I can see both ways. 855-450-NOAH. That's the number to join us. 855-450-6624. The email live at asknoahshow.com. Tony joins us from Canada. Hey, Tony, welcome to the show.
Hi, Noah. Hi, Steve. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
I have a question for you guys. So I have two Proxmox servers that I'm currently using, and I was hoping to eventually get some sort of high availability. I know I do need to get a third one to do high availability. So the whole the voting system, I think it's called Quorum or something. But my question was more on shared storage. So I'm kind of wondering what options do I have. So if I have I'm trying to get my head around if I have 3 servers, maybe I would do say 2 SANs. And I'm not looking for too much space. It's actually not a lot of storage space that I need. And I'm wondering, should I go with SSDs because I don't need a lot of storage space? Are there enterprise SSDs? Should I go with FreeNAS and appliance? I know it's a lot of questions all at once, but
yeah, for sure. So let's start with shared storage. Steve, what would be your thoughts if you wanted shared storage for a Proxmox cluster?
Well, since you called in, let's do the whole. He's a client. The very first thing that we think about is what are we trying to achieve? Like you've come at me with an objective, but not actually what you're trying to achieve. You've told me I want to use technology, but not what you're actually trying to get from it. So how you design your shared storage really is a function of what are you doing with it.
Right. So I have some virtual machines that I want, if I had a hardware failure on one of my hypervisors, I'd like them to be able to be brought up and spun up on another one of my hypervisors.
And
right?
do
and
you
make the SAN redundant so that way I don't have one SAN as my single point of failure.
Is this a home lab or are you doing this in a small business? Where what is the environment you're doing this in?
It's in a small business, yeah.
So small business. Then you absolutely want to have some redundancy then. There's a couple of things you could do. You could get, well, first of all, you have to consider what your back-end networking is going to be, right? Can't really talk storage if you don't have decent networking. Like if you slammed, 20 enterprise SSDs in there and then you're trying to do all of this over a 1 gig network, that's not really going to fly. So when you're talking about setting this up for even a small business, you need to think about how do I separate my traffic and what are my actual storage needs. So you said we've got some VMs. How many are there? And, do you approximately know how big they are?
Yeah, so it's about two VMs that are critical is actually the ones that I need to make sure are always up. As far as the actual, how much storage, probably, I think it's about 150 gigs.
So by always up, let's dissect that just a little bit. Do you mean no downtime, or do you mean because when you're transferring the VM hosting from one to the other, and you're talking about possibly SAN replication because you're talking about being able to make sure that if a SAN goes down, the VM's not down. So are you talking about a little bit of downtime is okay, but not hours? Or are you talking about no, this needs to be up immediately? What are we talking about?
Yeah. If it was I don't know, 30 seconds, a minute of downtime, that's totally livable, right? If I drop some packets, I'm totally cool with it as long as it kind of comes up right away. Because the solution that I've been using up until now has been it's kind of let's call it the poor man's redundancy is I have my VMs replicating from my ZFS data set replicating to another Proxmox box, and then I in the event that one dies, I connect in, turn on the next VM or the one that I have sitting there dormant that connects to the same virtual machine disk image, and I'm up and running. But that requires intervention. So I'm trying to just get something that's a bit better, but not necessarily without dropping a packet.
Are you guys considering a Fiverr backend for the VM transport?
We could. I mean, it could be right. We don't have. It's not too much IOPS. I don't even know how to calculate my IOPS, to be honest with you, but it's not too much. like there's not too much reading and writing going on.
So here's what I would counsel if you were my small business client. What I would say is if you want 2 SANs, then you're going to need at least 4 fiber links. So each SAN has to have 2 links because even if you're using something like TrueNAS or something like that, when you're exporting over the SAN, it will want 2 links. You can get away with 1, but there'll be a bunch of errors saying, I don't have redundant links and all the rest of that. And on top of that, you'll need to make sure that your admin traffic between, and I'm going to call it admin, I just mean traffic between the 2 SANs to make sure that the replication's happening. You're going to want to separate that because you don't want that going out over the same network. You can do this. So I do this in my home lab with 10 gigabit network, and that's more than sufficient and should be okay. But you're going to have, 2 VMs at 300 gigs total. You'll have a little bit of time where there's going to be some transfer from one SAN to the other if it needs to, but it should be okay. So it'll depend on what your budget is. So I'm going to stop and let Noah kind of jump in.
No, no, you're doing great. So if we break down what are his next steps, where would he go? So he has a desire of what he wants to set up. He knows roughly what kind of technology he wants to implement, but where does he go from here? What are the next steps?
So you got to nail down your networking. Your networking completely defines this project, because if you're doing shared storage, it's all about the networking and how reliable that is and how the communication happens between your 2 SAN hosts. So the first thing is to decide what kind of networking you're going to get and what protocols you're going to do, and whether you think you might have to expand this in the future. For example, 10 gigs is kind of considered the minimum reasonable link speed. You can do it over 1 gig, don't get me wrong. But as a general rule, if you're doing this for a business, 10 gig is kind of like the minimum, and then you scale that up to whatever it is you need to in the future. So you think about, are my needs ever going to grow in the next 3 to 5 years? And if they are, maybe fiber is the way to go. If you're really strapped for a budget, you could go with cheap fiber now, or 10 gig if you see that copper is advantageous for you. So you have to sort around what your network is going to be before you consider anything else. In terms of the software, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't do something like TrueNAS unless you have some specific storage needs. Like for things like Ceph or Gluster, they can help by exporting various types of storage. And while TrueNAS does iSCSI and NFS and Samba, the other ones do like block storage and object storage and things like that, where that might be advantageous to you in the future. So that would be my thoughts.
So question for you guys then. So when you say like the networking part, do I need an actual switch, or can I just connect? So let's say I got 3 boxes. I would need, I guess, are you saying like connect them each physically from like each box to each SAN, each hypervisor to each SAN? Or are you thinking of putting that I should put switches in between?
So the correct answer, so there's the cheap answer that will work, and then there's the correct answer. The correct answer is to go with switches. The cheap answer is to do what I did and just get, a big enough 4-port 10 gig NIC so that my redundant links will plug directly from my SAN into my 2 VM hosts, because I only have 2. But that doesn't scale if you add a 3rd one or a 4th one or a 5th one.
Right.
Although, hey, Steve, could he not start by having everything direct connected and then, okay, I want to go add a 4th one or a 5th one. Well, now I'll go buy a switch because I need to interconnect all of these boxes.
You could. There will be some, but like I said, in a business setup, you want to have 2 connections from each SAN going outward, which means that you're going to have at least 4 ports per host, because the SAN should have redundant links. And so You should have 2 per SAN, and he said he was thinking about having 2 SANs. So you're talking about 4 fiber channels or whatever, just for that. And then the VM hosts themselves need to communicate somehow, and they also have to communicate to the wider world, and as do the SANs. The SANs you have to be able to administer them somehow. So you're talking at least 3 connections at a bare minimum, probably 4 just for the SANs, because one connection has to be SAN to SAN, 1 connection should be how you administer, and 2 are the redundant links for the storage going out to the endpoints.
Tony, do you have a working environment right now, or is this all being set up from scratch?
I have a working environment that but we're looking at potentially upgrading the hypervisor hardware, which is kind of making me start to think, maybe we could, make it a little bit, not only do we need a little bit more processing power, but maybe it's a good time to, do the SAN upgrade.
Yeah, the reason I ask is my mind, as I'm listening to this conversation unfold, my mind kind of starts to wonder, would you be better off starting small and then scaling up? But it sounds like you have something started, so this is your opportunity to, if we're going to do it, let's do it right.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so if we have to go with switches and we have to incur that cost, I guess, it might be the better route. And because you're saying you guys recommend 2 redundant links from the SAN to the hypervisor. So if I'm doing it direct attached, I would need, if I have 3 hypervisors, I would probably need 6 connections then from the SANs, right? Because I'd have to go from each SAN 2 connections to each hypervisor, right?
And that's why it doesn't scale, right? So if you're if you ever want to add additional hypervisors, that method doesn't scale. In my case, I knew that the maximum I was going to have was 3 hosts, and so I'm not even doing redundant links. I'm doing single links and just waving away the error message or the warning messages that the SAN software screams at me for.
And FreeNAS would do that clustering. Does it kind of do a live clustering, or is it kind of active standby where you're using one and it just kind of on a quote unquote cron job replicates itself over to the other box?
That's a good question. Noah, do you know the answer to that?
So if you're so in general, if you have ZFS replication set up, it's going to follow a schedule. So it's going to say, hey, I want this data pool to exist on both of these servers, and here is the time I want these to go over. Now you can have it take snapshot as often as you want, right? So you can set that schedule up to snapshots to happen every minute, every 10 minutes, every hour. One thing that you have to be careful, and we weren't careful in one case and it kind of bit us, is you have to be cognizant of what else is the business doing during that time. Because if one of those replication tasks kick off during a time when they're trying to use the internet for other things, and you've not rate limited your replication, you're going to tank your own internet connection.
Right. Okay. And as far as going with something like spinning Rust versus SSDs, I know SSDs are better, and because my requirements for space are fairly low, would you recommend just sticking with SSDs, or
do you prioritize speed or reliability more? Well, I guess, hey, hold on. I guess that's an invalid question, because if you're setting up 3 hypervisors, that's where your reliability is going to come from. So yeah, I probably would go with SSDs. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think, well, it depends on whether you're cost sensitive or not. The SSDs are going to be more expensive. And you'll also want to have at least 4 of them, just because of the way that the software is going to write to the disk. I wouldn't do 2, and you should rarely do an odd number of drives. So myself, I went with SSDs. I went with 250 gig SSDs, and I have 8 of them slammed into my TrueNAS server. But it depends on what your storage needs are and how much disk that you're willing to sacrifice for things like if you're going to add parity disk. And additionally, you'll have to think about, if you're going to go with SSDs and this is a business, the enterprise SSDs are more expensive, but they definitely bring value in terms of IOPS and stuff like that. I went with just regular off-the-shelf ones because, if my VMs go away, it's my home lab, and I have a pretty solid backup strategy. So I don't really. It'd be an inconvenience for me to lose. I'd have to lose 3 drives before it would impact me, but still, you have to make that kind of own calculus to decide. Whereas with the spinning rust, that stuff will go pretty much until it dies, as opposed to having bad sectors or something like that. As a general rule, the enterprise SAS drives are pretty phenomenal.
Linux Ninja in the chat room adds, enterprise SSDs are worth it compared to the expected life expectancy of a consumer SSD. I would add to that, you're going to pay for those.
Yes.
Enterprise SSDs are stupid expensive. If you want the most extreme example of that I can think of off the top of my head, Google the Intel Optane drives and look at what they're going for.
Yeah, those are ridiculously expensive.
But the flip side of that is, if you need the performance, sometimes nothing else will do.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Right. And one last question for you guys. As far as hardware, do you guys recommend going with TrueNAS hardware, or buying, let's say, like a Dell server that has multiple slots? And what do you recommend?
Are you for sure going to run? I'm sorry, you told me. What was the you're going with Proxmox, right?
Proxmox.
Yeah,
because I've used other ones before. Like I've used KVM on its own, and there were some issues with I found with VLANing, giving different, tagging VLANs for different VMs. So
okay,
I've had luck with that.
If you're married to Proxmox, I wouldn't say there's a huge advantage in one particular hardware vendor or another. I would look at what other Proxmox users are using and what they have good success with. Dell has a phenomenal VM host lineup, so if you give them a call. So one of my favorite expressions, one of our installers says, the Dell R540 has something for everyone. They start at like $1,200 and they go up to like $15,000, $16,000. And I mean, just pick your budget and pick what you want, and the Dell R540 will do it for you. If you call Dell up and just say, hey, here's what I'm looking at doing, they'll be able to guide you through buying a piece of hardware that's going to work well. Where I think IX Systems is worth their money is if you're going to do something with TrueNAS and you want something that has been tested and certified for VMware stuff. But if you're not going down that route, that's not worth the money.
I went with HP. The model number is DL380, and they have, Gen 8, Gen 9, Gen 10. The reason why I did those is because those are 2U servers that I found to be the most cost effective. I looked at Dell's and other things. I found these to be the most cost effective, especially for the number of disks that I could potentially cram in them. So disclaimer, I have had multiple servers from IX Systems. I've had Dell's, I've got HP's, and I've built my own. So I have a wide experience, and I don't have anything bad to say about either the Dell's or IX. I just found that the HPE DL380s were just the right bang for the buck for me.
Do you have anything that you said this was like out of the park the best experience I've had?
I would say the Dells were pretty good. Well, okay, it depends. If you're talking about customer service, the IX guys were really good. Mm-hmm. If you're talking about remote manageability, I found that their servers lagged a little bit behind the Dells, which I would still class above the HPEs, but they get me done.
The iDRAC. So I'll just a quick plug for my friends over at Dell. We bought a brand new vHost for a client. Got there on a Friday. This is the middle of BFE, Wisconsin, right? Like there's no one here. And get to the client site, we plug the thing in, server's dead, won't boot up. Call Dell, hey, bought this brand new server, it's dead. They flew a guy out. He came, he was there by Saturday, had the new motherboard, took the entire server apart, went through, figured out it was actually the motherboard, had a suitcase full of parts with him, put a new motherboard in, put the thing back together, and had it back up and running in like 4 hours. within 24 hours of us purchasing the server and getting on site and realizing it was bad and letting Dell know about it. So I don't have enough time or enough room to explain how highly I think of Dell's customer service and the way that they take care of their business clients. When you have a problem, they come running. And that, as an IT provider, is worth tons. So I'll give that plug there, but all of that largely goes out the window if you're buying used, which you might very well consider doing if you want to balance your budget a little bit with getting, you could buy some of these used HP servers or used Dell servers or used Supermicro, which is really what IX is. And if you're not concerned about the warranty or the service aspect of it, you could save quite a few dollars by just getting something, gently used.
Yeah, no, that's great. Guys, I really, really, really appreciate all the advice. Thank you so much.
You bet. Will you do me a favor, Tony? Give us a call back as this project progresses and let us know how it works out. We'd love to hear.
Definitely, I will. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate the time. 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. That is how you join the program, become a part of the program. Our third email comes in from Jeremy. Jeremy writes in and says, so I've been having issues with both Ethernet and USB printing, mostly with Linux. I'm on Ubuntu 2204, and I have a Brother HL2370DW. I like the printer model, and I think the second one I've had both have some issues. Sometimes spool jobs will not print until I restart the printer. Both are on USB or Ethernet. Any ideas? So here's the deal. We have supported Brother printers for kiosks for years now in hotels, and I've also run into these problems. Steve, do you have any experience with Brother printers? And if so, what's the answer here?
Well, I don't know that I have an exact answer, but yes. So I've also had Brother printers for the last 12 years. What I have found, particularly Ubuntu, is a big pain in the butt because my wife's laptop runs Ubuntu Mate, and with our printer, it kept adding the printer back every time I removed it. It's like, I'm being helpful. I'm going to put it back. And the problem is that the drivers that come with Ubuntu, they don't work. They just don't do anything. And so I actually had to go get the tarball from the website and manually install it, which is fine. It works, except that this stupid laptop keeps adding the dummy printer back in, and she always has to try and print twice because she never knows which one it is because it won't stay gone. But yeah, the solution for us has always been find the tarball on the website. This is the third model of Brother that I've had to do this from. I find the tarball that works eventually, and then I store it. I put it on my NAS, and then I grab it whenever I have to do a reinstall or anything like that. Haven't had any issues between running Arch and running Ubuntu and Fedora here with the tarball. So that has been the way we've solved it with the last three Brother printers.
And to be clear, the Ghost printer stays gone when you do it that way?
Nope.
Okay.
Not on Ubuntu. It just keeps adding it back. It's like, hey, I found a printer. Like, but you already have a printer. And I've deleted you. Go away.
Well, maybe you can rename the printer, use this one. But in either event, that is the most reliable way that you can probably get a Brother printer to work. I'm going to give a small plug for my for HP printers because they work natively on Linux every time with their HP JetDirect software. Hey, the music in our ears, again, means we're out of time. Thanks for joining us for another episode. We'll be back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You can join us live at AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.